Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dennis Wilson here from the beautiful state of Montana, as you can see from my flag over my shoulder. And I welcome you to my podcast, We the People 250. Today, we are going to first, I don't want to forget, I want to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So let's go ahead and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll take it from there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And thank you for tuning in today. If you were with me in episode 7, the last podcast, I launched the second core of discovery. If you remember, the first core of discovery was Thomas Jefferson when he sent Lewis and Clark west to explore the Louisiana Purchase, which he knew nothing about. We, the American people, knew very little about. And so he sent his crew out west to explore this new section of the United States and to find an all-water route to the Pacific. Well, our second core of engineers, second core of discovery, that we'll call it, the second core of discovery, it's more of an academic endeavor than trying to find land or resources or whatever may be out there. We're strictly looking at it from an academic standpoint, and we are in search as well. We're in search of those principles that came down through the ages and gave us the principles and ideas of self-governance. Today we call it a Republican democracy. And those terms, again, I said it the other day, I want to say it again, those two words have different meaning than what we find in the present context of the words Republican and Democrat. And I'll go in and explain some of that as we go along. In the last podcast, we launched from Boston, Massachusetts. We boarded the USS Constitution, which was one of our first frigates built, and we got on board. There was every citizen in the United States, all 347,747,000 on board. So we have a packed ship. And we sailed east into the Mediterranean and then to the far end of the Mediterranean where we docked, and we went back, way, way, way back to find our first piece of the puzzle, as we called it. And so we were looking for that first time that we can claim any principles, any ideas that help to advance this notion of Republican democracy. And we find it in 1446 BC, that's way before the birth of Christ, with Moses and his 10 commandments. And I went over that and I talked about some of the commandments that pertain to us. And now we're going to move on. We've got one piece of the puzzle. There are thousands of pieces, and I won't have time in my lifetime remaining to be able to find all those. But we will get on to some of the more important ones. The ship now will take to sea, and we just have a short journey from the coast of present-day Israel over to Greece. The contributions that Greece gave to democracy and republicanism were many. And there were three principal philosophers, political philosophers as they called themselves, that gave us immense insight and ideas of how to govern ourselves. And so we're going to take a look at the city-state of Athens and talk about, today we'll talk about one of those early, the first and earliest, and maybe the most famous of the trio, Socrates. We'll spend some time and dive into some of his ideas and what contributions he made down the road. I would like to caution everyone that, unfortunately, Socrates never wrote anything. He didn't do a biography. There were no writings that could ever be found. We had to rely on others. And the most important was his student Plato, who was with him, and Socrates was a mentor to Plato, and he was with him for over 20 years. So obviously they knew each other very well, and again, their contribution is in the field of political philosophy. So with that said, I'd like to go ahead and begin that journey down that road and see what we can find. But before I do that, I want to mention a new element that has been added to my podcast, and that's the Kids Corner, as I call it. And so I will have a question in the Kids Corner, and you can research it, see what you can find. Talk to your parents, talk to your friends, see what you can find. Get out there. You're part of the Corps of Engineer, the Corps of Discovery, and you have to find these answers for us. So I want you to focus on Aristotle. Aristotle was the third of these philosophers, and I would like to know when, where, who, and how he became so famous. So answer those questions in your own framework, in your own presentation. You put a question together and then go look for the answers. And we'll come back to it in the next podcast and talk about Aristotle. Okay, kids, that's your homework. Let's go ahead and move on now and talk about Socrates. He was born in 470 BC. He died in a very tragic way in 399 BC. So we're still way back before the time of Christ, but these three were instrumental in giving us core founding principles to the Constitution. Socrates came amazingly from a humble background. He was a stonecutter, which means that he chiseled with his hands, with a chisel and a hammer, and he chiseled out pictures, diagrams, words, etc., in stone. And that's what he did as a young man. And I'm not sure, again, maybe that's some research someone can come up with and tell me how he transitioned from a stonecutter, who was just an artisan, a worker, to that of a renowned legend, really the father of political philosophy. So how that came about, I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure that I would say most likely that he had mentors that he listened to and talked to about politics. In general, all of the Athenians who were living in the city-state of Athens were part of the first, that as we know, at least in Western civilization, a democratic government. Now, this government was what we refer to as a direct democracy. And that means that everyone of age, and the 18 and older, they came down maybe monthly or whatever was needed to discuss the important critical issues of Athens and try to find solutions. But surprisingly, they gave us this notion also of voting, vote. The people were expected to be active citizens and to participate as best they could in the debates and listen carefully to what was being said. Unfortunately, Socrates uh, was born at a time when Athens was almost constantly in a state of turmoil. They were constantly at war with their nearby sister state of Sparta, and they were at war almost continuously. They never were able to resolve that, and that would have a serious effect on their society, on their democracy, and all of that, and eventually brought them down to their knees between that and another thing that Socrates observed during his time was political corruption within their democratic society. Yeah, does that sound familiar? Yes, corruption. And there were elitist families that manipulated and controlled many people within the democracy, influencers, and in some cases bad influences. When they wanted to, they could have good influence, but uh, many times not, especially in the age of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So that's kind of the background that Socrates faced as a young man, and it shaped his political views. So let's go on, and we'll proceed now to some of the ideas of Socrates and his contributions to political science or political philosophy. Amazingly, there were two things that were at the heart of who he was and what he believed. He believed in wisdom and truth. Wisdom and truth. He hung his hat on those two principles. And he believed that we as good citizens believed in active citizenship, that people had to participate, they had to be a part of their society and take an active role. There was, of course, apathy, which apathy simply means they didn't care. They just didn't care as much. And so they didn't participate. And that is a cancer and a disease on any freedom-loving people that want to be self-governing. We have to wake up. We have to work on those people who are inactive and make them active today as it applies to our own situation today. Because we have much corruption, we have a lot of apathy throughout the country. And in some cases, if they knew the Constitution, I think that they might push the pause button and go, yeah, I think I need to, for a variety of reasons, I need to be a participating good citizen. So that was one of the hallmarks of Socrates' thinking. There were others. Second, secondly, he believed that education and virtue were a central part of a democratic society. Education, in his mind, was critical, that a young child should um, be trained beginning at a very young age, 5 or 6, through 18, and even continue beyond that. But those were the critical years. And he thought that one of the main purposes of education was to teach virtue. Now, think about it for a minute. This is the second time now that we are talking about virtue, and you're going to hear more of it, because at the heart of virtue is the notion of self-control and self-regulation. In other words, we are a self-governing human being. And if we have high moral standards, we will be good influencers and we will do the right things and we will be successful. If not, then we will decay and decline and fail like many other countries have done in the past. And we've got to avoid that at all costs, because I fear what the answer to that would be. So education was critical. He believed in a lot of what we call content areas. He believed that the kids should be not just virtuous, that they should be also educated in the arts and sciences, in language, in logic and reason. He put his faith in what we call today critical thinking skills. I remember back in my college days, at the end, I had a professor in education. His name was Chuck or Charles Johnson. He was a young guy, and he really pushed this whole idea of young people, every one of us, learning how to think critically. So much so that he stood behind it 100%. And I want to tell just a quick story of this. When I was doing my student teaching, I was in a geography class with two veteran teachers who were team teaching the class, and then myself and another student teacher. And, halfway through the semester, we were given opportunities to teach. That's what we were there for. And this particular individual, she got up, and we were talking about the geography of the Scandinavian countries. And I think we were talking about, I think it was Norway. And the new teacher, a practicing teacher, she was asking a lot of factual questions like, what's the weather like in Norway? What kind of winters do they have? Other aspects of weather. How many inches of annual rainfall do we get? What's the land, the topography look like? Is it farmland or is it hills? And the students went through there. Long story short, the students went through there, and this one student, and she answered those questions. And I'm thinking, okay, those are the facts. Now, what's the point of this? What's the critical thinking part of this episode? And she just didn't get there. So I turned to the veteran teacher and I said, may I ask a couple questions? And she said yes. So I looked at the girl and I said, okay, so we've talked about all of these things involving weather, and we've talked about, the topography and what the land looked like, and that they lived on the ocean. We've talked about all these things. Now, tell me, what does that have to do with the way they made a living? And by golly, she nailed it. She hit a home run. She hit it out the park. And she was able to connect those dots and tell me that these people had to turn to making a living on the ocean. They became shipbuilders. They did not have much agriculture, so they were importing, which meant that they had to sell a lot of things. They developed their mineral resources. They went into the lumber business, et cetera, et cetera. So I just went, okay, great, you did it. So here's the point. After class, I was called up in front of the two master teachers, and I got scolded. I got hammered right in front of Professor Johnson, right in front of the other teacher. They hammered me for what I had said, the questions I had asked, and that I had interrupted the other teacher. And so afterwards, we walked outside, and Professor Johnson looked at me and he said, "Dennis, you did the right thing. Those are the kinds of critical thinking skills that we're trying to develop. We're not just after facts. Okay, anybody can look up a fact. We want to teach these kids how to connect dots and give us conclusions and give us information related to all that." He didn't scold her. He was talking to me, and I took that to heart. I guess if I had been Socrates, I would have turned to the two veteran teachers and asked some other questions related to this, but, well, guess what? They probably would have given me a bad resume, and who knows? Maybe I never would have got a teaching job. I don't know. Sorry to take all this time, but that is the importance. You can see that this one thing from Socrates came all the way down, and it visited me in my life, and I'll never forget that moment. It was a special kind of light bulb goes on, like, "Oh, wow," and so, just to throw that out there when we're talking about critical thinking. So that was one of the hallmarks of his beliefs. Now, another area that was important to Socrates was he believed that we need to push, as individuals, we need to push the pause button once in a while and take a look at ourselves. He referred to it as self-examination. Today, psychologists call it introspection. So he said, we need to look at ourselves. What have we done right? What have we done wrong? What could we have done? What should we have done to improve our behavior, our attitudes, our beliefs, to make us a better person, not just to help ourselves, but to help society and the city state in which they lived. And that was something that he was he was on all the time, that we need to just step back, take a breath, and slap ourselves on the back when we do the right thing. You kids, when somebody drops a pencil in class, right there, they're looking for it. You bend down, pick it up, hand it to them. Real simple. And there's many, many, many more things that we can do. But I think we need to maybe at the end of the week just stop for a moment and go, okay, who did I help this week? Did I obey all the rules and laws? Did I drive too fast? You broke a law. Do better next week. And on with all of this. And Socrates believed that it would make us a better person. And I think that he was definitely right. So let me just pause for a minute. I got to look at my notes. Hang on with me. Bear with me. I just want to go back for a second, hit on that notion of active citizenship. It's one thing to talk about, virtue. It's another thing to be a virtuous person and make that a hallmark part of your daily behavior. Uh, we have to we have to step to the plate, so to speak, as they like to say in baseball. Step to the plate and be accountable. Okay, I am going to whatever it takes. I'm 18 now, and we've got a critical election coming up. It's an off cycle year. What they say is the president's not running, but we got congressmen and senators and others to elect. And so fewer and fewer people show up at the ballot box. We can't do that. We have to pay attention, read, listen, gather as much information you can from multiple sources, and study those things carefully, asking questions, listen carefully, and then go in and vote your conscience. You have to step to the plate and do that for all of us. So if you're 18 and over, I encourage you to get out there in this off year cycle and vote. Okay, very, very correct. And the vote, the idea of voting, the idea of democracy and the principles that followed, uh, critical to us today. These are a very important part of who we are and a very important part of the Constitution. With that said, I'm going to move on. I got to turn my page, so hang with me here just for a second. I got notes here, and I got to take a look at them. 1 second, let me look. Okay, another beautiful part of Socrates, and I think of him as the more I read and the more I thought about him, I go, this guy was a hippie out of the 1960s. Yeah, he was. Because us kids growing up, we learned to question. We learned to question authority. We learned to question our parents. We learned to question as to why in the hell we were in the Vietnam War. And that's no disrespect for those who served. Um, they did their duty. But there was a large element, a growing element throughout that war period that looked for answers to why halfway around the world we would be tied up in a war. And that's just one example. When we get into Nixon's follies of Watergate and the trickery that got played there, we started asking a lot of questions. Up until that point, I think that we were very very much like little wooden soldiers. When the government spoke, we stepped in line, we followed them. Okay, they know what they're talking about. We don't. Blah blah. And from that, I think we've learned a lot. And again, this has a lot to do with Socrates. That you challenge protocols, you challenge rules. It doesn't mean you disobey your parents, but if you can have a um, conversation without all of the rage and yelling and screaming, then do that, and maybe both sides can have that aha moment, like, hey, I learned something from this, and I'm going to take it with me. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, what else? What else here? Like I said, Socrates was the gadfly. He questioned and questioned and questioned and questioned. Again, these questions were dangerous because he asked questions in an open forum where everybody in Athens that was a citizen could be there to voice their opinions and to listen. And so he challenged the elite, the elitist. He challenged their policies, and they didn't like it. Okay, they just came to resent him and his presence. But he was relentless and he continued on and on. He knew that his life could be at risk, but he was he was unwilling to back down from his principles. He thought he was on high moral ground, and he took the high road. And history tells us plainly that this man was a legend. He did the right things, and we appreciate all that he did. There are some other things here that I think that could be mentioned about Socrates. Give me just a moment, and I'll look again. Okay, I want to sum up Socrates. I want to sum up Socrates and talk about his death. I said that he was under the scrutiny of the rulers of the city-state of Athens for his constant questioning. And so they decided that because of this, they were going to put Socrates to death. They were going to execute him. And they put him on trial and found him guilty. And they gave him hemlock and put him to death simply for stating what he believed. Now remember, here's the point I want to make. He did this not in a monarchy, a monarchical government, not in a tyrannical government, but in a democracy. And democracy at that moment failed. It failed him and it failed Athens. And many of those people sitting in the crowd, they knew it. They had to have known it, that it was wrong, that all he was doing was expressing his ideas. And so they killed the messenger. And that's really sad, that would have taken place. But it illustrates that, democracy can become mob rule, and mob rule can become bad influencers. And those bad influencers can make bad decisions and hurt a lot of people. And that's what happened. And his pupil, Plato, knew and watched all of this, and that was sad. And so he knew also that his life was at risk, but that did not stop him. It's hard, it's extremely hard to destroy the truth, to destroy wisdom, to destroy people who have knowledge, who are educated, and they are free, critical thinkers, and they are relentless, and they will continue to ask questions, search for answers, search for the truth, and do that in a civilized way and civilized debate without the political rage. So it was a terrible thing that happened, but we need to, and it could happen in any in our case, a Republican Democratic society. It could happen here. The mob could gain control, and then all I could say is, watch out. Bad things can happen. Now, let me go on. I want to move on now. I've said some things here about Socrates. I think that, those things were important, but he had a student. Let me turn the page here. He had his student, one of them, there were others, many others, but was Plato. And Plato was born in, let me look here, it was in 427 BC. He died in 348 BC. And he studied under Socrates. Socrates was his mentor for over 20 years. And so they must have become very good friends. They didn't always come to the same conclusions. Using their critical thinking skills, they came to different conclusions on subject matter, but it did not destroy their friendship, and they were able to learn from each other. Again, and you'll see this throughout many of the lives of these political philosophers. They were living in a time of chaos and much stress, war, threats of war, and many other things that inflicted them. And so was the case with Plato. Remember, he had just watched his buddy take some hemlock by force and die. And so he knew that his life could be in jeopardy. But to his credit, He did not, um, he did not waver. He continued to teach others. He became a mentor for many, many others down the road and very helpful. Now, unlike Socrates, he came from an aristocratic family. They were wealthy, they were well placed, they were part of the elitist, and so much difference from this humble little guy we know as Socrates. Actually, he was big. He was a great big guy. But anyway, um, he he was one who came in at a time when there was a beautiful uh, city-state of Athens that was in decline. Corruption was all around him. It was everywhere. And he he wanted, because of his family status, he wanted to play a role. He was interested in politics, but he would not sacrifice his beliefs for that of the elitists just so he could participate. And so he really did, as a political figure, he really did very little, but he did a lot when it came to political philosophy. And uh, he was he was the one that was looking for after the death of Socrates and with all this chaos and interruption that was going on, he was after searching for a lifelong search for the perfect government, for a government, a self governance, one that would not be led by mob rule. And he felt that to get there, we needed, again, just like Socrates, we needed wisdom and we needed virtue, we needed knowledge. And so he proposed, and he went deep into his education philosophy. He believed that regardless of class, that all children, now get this, remember, we're talking like 400 years before Christ, of gender equity. That's right, that women should participate in education on an equal basis. This notion would get buried in history, would be pushed aside, unfortunately, and it would take a very courageous group of women in Britain and the United States to push for equality of gender and political rights for women. It's sad that that happened, but basically, the world would see great ups and downs after the death of Athens. And, that's just the way history rolled. I used to tell my students, seems like every other day in class, we're talking about a new war. That's the way it was. That's the way the world tumbled at that time. It was a very dangerous place. So, anyway, along comes Plato, and he really examines the role of education and what that should look like. And he said that all students should participate. They should receive this education through the age of 18, but he also went further. He said that the children should be removed from the home and placed in these schools, basically raised by the state until the age of 18, where they learned about the fundamentals of self governance, of virtue, wisdom, and content, all of the different sciences and arts and so forth, and that they should do this not just through the age of 18, but he believed that 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 life. Oops, there goes my buzzard. So it looks like I've come upon the end of the podcast. So kids, I want to remind you, in the kids corner, you have a homework assignment. I've tried to do my best. I apologize for having to stare at my notes, but that's just the way it is, and I have to deal with it and fight through it, and I will. So as long as you continue to watch this, again, I ask you to go out and find a few friends and family members that would like to take a look at this. I'd like to expand this class and hope you will continue watching. I hope you enjoyed my show, so I wish you a good day, and we will be back soon with episode 9. In the meantime, episodes 7 and 8 should be coming out. Today is Tuesday, so it should be coming out tomorrow or the next day. We'll see. But stay tuned for episodes 7 and 8. And thank you for watching. Good day.